I remember walking through a Target in Bethesda, Maryland, after being told you're having this surgery, and writing an email to my best girlfriends and saying, like, here's the deal. Like, this is not just a one-off situation. I have this rare disease. I've basically been hiding it all my life. Like, don't hate me, don't judge me. I'm just so uncomfortable in my skin that I couldn't get myself to tell you this before, and I didn't want it to impact anything. And they wrote back with, oh my God, we're here for you. We love you. We support you. I'm so sorry you've been silently struggling. Why have you not told us? Like, just so compassionate. And it was the first entry into me realizing exactly what you said, which is, wow, this is sort of empowering to share my story, as opposed to feeling more shame or discomfort or less than in any way. And I really recognized how powerful it was to start telling my story. But to your point, I did feel very lonely. I had my best friends, I had my family who, obviously learned that this was happening over time and sharing that with them. But at the end of the day, similar to you being young with cancer, it's really isolating.
Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in week after week. The show continues to grow. I really appreciate all the support that you all are giving me and giving this podcast and allowing it to blossom into what it's becoming. And it's really because of you and the feedback that you've been giving and all the kind words you've had to say about the guests that have come on so far. If you haven't already, there will be a discount code in the show notes for Break Barriers and Audacious. And so that's a benefit of being a listener for the show. You get a little discount on the books if you want to go check them out. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit subscribe, follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Today's guest is Harper Spero. She is a storyteller, a community builder, podcast host, and business coach. During a fast-paced career in marketing, PR, and event production, spanning the beauty, music, and tech industries, Harper's life came to a halt with a life-altering surgery due to a rare immunodeficiency disease, hyper IgE syndrome. After living quietly with her invisible illness for nearly 3 decades, Harper's surgery was the straw that broke her silence, leading to the creation of the Made Visible podcast, sharing her writing with the world and business coaching and consulting. Harper, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm honored to be here and grateful for your time because we've rescheduled a few times.
No worries at all. I know you've had a lot on your plate, and so I wanted to make sure that when the time was right, we brought you on. You've had quite an impressive resume, and you were a guest that I've had circled for a while. And, we can provide the context for the guests here. You are related to a former guest that was on the show, Steve and Claire. And so that's how I got introduced to you.
Absolutely.
And so, it's just always amazing to me how just good people introducing me to good people, and the circle continues to grow. And with the premise of this show, I read your bio, and Stephen was like, you got to bring her on. And immediately I was like, absolutely. So why don't we dig into your story a little bit? And talk about the buildup to your diagnosis, and talk about life leading up to it, just so we can kind of get a sense of who you were before you took on this role.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you asked me before we were recording if I had any siblings, and my answer was yes, Stephen, because he and his brother are like brothers to me, even though I'm an only child. As my dad say, they're the sons he never wanted. So who I am pre-diagnosis. So basically, I take things back to 2011. I started a job running the digital department of a beauty PR firm. Super, super high stress, working crazy hours, really intense time in my life, never feeling like I was enough or giving enough, doing enough. And I would go, 2 blocks of New York City streets and immediately have to lean against a wall, feel like I was going to collapse. I'd take taxis really short distances. I lived in an apartment building that I was on the 3rd floor, and I had the 2 flights up that I could not get up the stairs. And I'm a native New Yorker who can walk endlessly and chooses to walk as opposed to take the subway or the bus or a taxi in most situations. And something was not right. Something was going on with my breathing that I could not maintain my breath. And I'd get upstairs and collapse on my couch and go, something's not right. So I went to my general practitioner. She gave me some antibiotics and inhalers and basically said, you've got bronchitis, and sent me on my way. And after 3 months, absolutely nothing changed and it was not manageable anymore. And my mom said, listen, you got to see a specialist. Something's not right. So I ended up going to a pulmonologist at NYU. She did an x-ray, a blood test, and a CAT scan. The x-ray and blood test results came back that same day. They were totally normal. My mom and I stood in the office hysterically crying on her end and me going, something's still not right. Just because we have these good results doesn't mean everything's fine. And the next day I woke up to a phone call from my doctor asking if I was with my parents. I lived alone at the time. I was 27. And she said, and are you sitting down? Which no one ever wants to hear these words. And what she told me, which I was listening to you on a podcast, is really interesting. The synergies here is I had a cyst the size of a golf ball in my right lung. And I heard you reference your cancer as a golf ball. Exactly. So anything that happened those moments after, I completely blacked out. I could have thrown the phone. I could have kept listening, but not actually paying attention to what she was saying. But everything in my life is pretty much before and after that phone call. What you need to understand is that I was 27 at the time. And prior to that, I was diagnosed with a rare immune deficiency, as you said at the top, called hyper IgE syndrome when I was 10 years old. And it took my mom the first 10 years of my life to diagnose me for this condition. Went to every doctor, healer, practitioner, everyone in New York City, and nobody knew what to do with me. And finally, when I was 10, an immunologist did a blood test and said, oh, you have hyper IgE syndrome. Okay, what do I do with this information? Take this antibiotic for the rest of your life. We don't know a lot of information, and sent me on my way. So when I'm 27 and I have this conversation with the pulmonologist, she's saying you have to have surgery immediately. You've got to get this out of your lung. We don't know what it is, how long it's been there, but it's got to go. So I ended up calling the immunologist who had diagnosed me 17 years earlier. And she said, you can't have the surgery. You will not make it out alive because of my underlying condition and being immunocompromised. So one doctor 24 hours ago said, I have to do this. And the doctor who diagnosed me, on the other hand, is going, you cannot do this. So what I ended up doing was going down to the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, and I was enrolled in a study there basically overnight. They typically take people a year in advance, but my doctor got me in saying there's such urgency in this. And it was a place where I had been told about by this immunologist when I was diagnosed when I was younger, but I wasn't really up for being a guinea pig anymore. Having a rare disease when you're young, no one knows what to do with you. And I didn't want to be poked and prodded any more than I already had been. So I went to this research hospital, very skeptical, and walked out learning I needed to have the surgery. It was very dangerous. They gave me a lot of warnings of how it could potentially not work out, but also said there's no other option. So on March 5th, 2012, I had a quarter of my right lung removed. And what they removed was something called aspergillus, which is a form of mold. And I was living in a West Village old apartment at the time. And it's possible, we don't really know for a fact, that it came from that apartment. So that's sort of the rundown of how that all came to fruition. And I guess to your point in my bio, I told nobody about my health when I was 27 and younger. Nobody. I talked about it with my mom and my doctors. As I mentioned, my cousin, he had no idea what I was going through. My mom told her siblings and her parents, little sprinklings of things. But I was so private and so insecure and uncomfortable in my skin about everything related to my health that I just pretended it didn't exist.
Man, I mean, I can definitely relate to that. And I know, and we went through our health crises at different ages, but I walked around throughout my entire life, not really speaking to what I had gone through. And again, the psyche of a young child is different than the psyche of a 20-something-year-old. But even in my teens and in my young 20s, I just kind of pushed it to the wayside and kind of didn't want to address it head on as being a part of who I am and who I became and how it impacted the decisions that I made and how, having that card dealt meant that I had to play hands differently, whether it was in my personal life, whether it was my professional life, whether it was, in some of the goals that I wanted to accomplish. And we'll get there in this conversation, but I'm interested in when you decided to own it as being, you. And clearly you get there throughout this process, and I'm guessing it's the same for you as it was for me, in the sense that once you finally own it, you just free yourself of this like incredible burden that you've been holding on to for your entire life, essentially. Before we get there, I want to make sure we educate the audience a little bit around immunodeficiency. And that was a word that was thrown around a lot during COVID, right? And the idea of being immunocompromised. And, a lot of people heard it. I don't know that a lot of people understood it. And I do believe there's a wide application for it. And so can you share with us a little bit with regards to maybe defining immunodeficiency? I mean, I know it sounds like it could be defined on its own, but let's take it at the highest level, and then let's break it down a little bit more into specifically your immunodeficiency.
Yeah, I mean, I would say when it relates to like COVID and the conversations that were happening in that front, immunocompromise is, exactly as it says, a compromised immune system, a weakened immune system. My condition called hyper IgE syndrome, there's less than 300 of us diagnosed in the world at this point in life. So it's a rare immune deficiency. Personally, how I was affected was mostly skin related and infections. So when I was a kid, I had a lot of rashes, eczema, ear infections, colds, bacterial infections. I had warts on my hands. Every single nail on my fingers fell off and were fungal infections. They all grew back. I've been asked to be a hand model, years later. But for me, it was mostly skin related. I spent a lot of my teenage years and early 20s wearing high neck shirts and long sleeves in the summer, because my chest was broken out or my arms were filled with eczema, and I didn't want anyone to see my skin and who I was, really. And it was not until this surgery and the story I just shared with you that my lungs became a part of the problem. And a lot of people with my condition have had this surgery, have had aspergillus, are like me, being on antifungal medications for life, and that being something that is manageable and helps keep everything at bay. There are other symptoms that other people with my condition have that I do not, that are more skeletal. And they've had a lot of bone structure issues and a lot of fractures, and are easy to like damage different bones. I've been very fortunate not to have that. A lot of dental issues. I had most of my baby teeth extracted because my adult teeth were coming in early. So like these like weird combo of things that no one as a kid or teenager or certainly 20 something wanted to be dealing with, but that was my reality. And to your point, it was not something that I wanted to fess up about. I wanted to fit in amongst my friends at all ages. I was always this big personality, very social. And I felt like if I was to share, then I would be treated differently.
That makes total sense. Let me ask you, did your parents or anyone close to you growing up have a medical background?
My mom became a doctor for, not professionally, but very much for me. And
Yeah.
she ran a holistic healthcare center in New York City when I was in high school. And the access to people that she had that, did acupuncture and kinesiology and reflexology and all these things that are really trendy and popular now were certainly not in, 2001. And I was trying gluten-free diets and eating kale at 17 years old, which, wasn't a thing back then. So my mom researched everything Eastern and Western, trying to find answers for me.
And was most of your treatment in the same places, or did you have to travel around more than that? Like besides that study, did you have to travel anywhere else for?
No, I've really stuck with doctors in New York. Like finding this pulmonologist was game changing for me. She's been exceptional. My team at the NIH is amazing. I go there every year for just like 2 days and have tons of tests, just sort of checking in. And she works very closely, my pulmonologist in New York, with my doctors at the NIH. And I went to the Mayo Clinic once back in like 2019 and was basically told to prepare to be there for 4 to 5 days. And I spent 2.5 hours with the doctor, and he basically said, "You don't need us. You don't need me. You have the best doctors in the world on your case. Keep doing what you're doing," which felt really validating for a place that's so prestigious and takes so much to get into. And it was like, all right, get me out of cold Minneapolis, and get me back to New York, because like this guy's telling me I'm good.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So, like you said, right? 300 people have this diagnosis, and in your young 20s, I have to imagine. Only speaking for myself, I mean, a part of it is like I have this disease that really makes me very unique. Which, if you want to put a positive spin on it, you could look at it as this opportunity to shine a light on, you know. A burden that not many people can understand, and it kind of distinguishes you and your strength, which is how I think on the other side of things people tend to look at it. But as you're going through it, I'm sure there's a lot of insecurity, a lot of why me, a lot of like, of course, like of course me. Can we talk about that a little bit with regards to on the inside, what was going on as you were battling this, and who you leaned on the most? It sounds like your mother was someone who you leaned on heavily. Was there anyone else around at that time that you kind of entrusted with this battle?
What's really interesting is when Stephen and I were in sleepaway camp back in the day, I had a friend in my bunk that I was really, really, really close with, and she had fibromyalgia. And she was very public about it. Everyone knew her sort of as a sick girl. She just made herself very clearly public about the information. And in all our years of friendship, I never disclosed to her what I was going through back in the day. And she could have been such a valuable person, even if I said, "I'm going to tell you a secret. Here's something that could be really, helpful for us to be in community together in going through something." But I didn't identify as a sick person in the way that she did. And so there was no commonality. And years later, I look back and I've had conversation with her going like, this could have been so beneficial to both of us. But it took this surgery. It took medical leave from my job to just sort of shake my world upside down and go, I need to do work that's meaningful. I need to do things that have purpose. I need to take care of my health, which I had never prioritized. I really just leaned on my mom and what she suggested I do, and being open to what she suggested, even if I didn't really believe in it. And I realized that I needed to prioritize me. And I'd never done that before. And it's still a hard thing for me to do. I mean, creating boundaries became really important. And I don't think I was a very boundaried person. Now, most people that know me think I'm like the most boundaried person. And I think it's a really important thing. But at that time, I remember walking through a Target in Bethesda, Maryland, after being told you're having this surgery, and writing an email to my best girlfriends and saying, like, here's the deal. Like, this is not just a one-off situation. I have this rare disease. I've basically been hiding it all my life. Like, don't hate me, don't judge me. I'm just so uncomfortable in my skin that I couldn't get myself to tell you this before, and I didn't want it to impact anything. And they wrote back with, "Oh my God, we're here for you. We love you. We support you. I'm so sorry you've been silently struggling. Why have you not told us?" Like, just so compassionate. And it was the first entry into me realizing exactly what you said, which is, wow, this is sort of empowering to share my story as opposed to feeling more shame or discomfort or less than in any way. And I really recognized how powerful it was to start telling my story. But to your point, I did feel very lonely. There weren't, I had my best friends, I had my family who, obviously learned that this was happening over time and sharing that with them. And I have an incredible support system. But at the end of the day, similar to you being young with cancer, it's really isolating. And there's a lot of experiences that you just feel super alone. I mean, I remember the night before my surgery being hysterical crying, and my dad said, "You're going to get through this." And I responded, "How do you know?" Because we didn't have that. There was no facts about that. The NIH doctors were not saying that was a fact. So I didn't feel, I wasn't, planning my departure from this earth. I didn't think I was going to die, but I also didn't think I wasn't. So I think for me, it was really just, before surgery and after surgery, getting through it was a realization of like, why am I working in beauty PR? This is so meaningless when I've gone through what I've gone through. I love beauty products. I can spend hours, buying it, consuming it, whatever, but not a profession. And it really made me just realize what was most important in my life, who was most important in my life. I had a friend that I remember gave me a hard time for not meeting her halfway or going to her apartment while I was recovering. And I was like, what are you missing here? I can't walk. Like, I'm not coming to the east side when I live on the west side right now. I can't even walk a block. I'm not getting in a taxi right now. So I learned really fast who was going to be there to support me. But at that time, I definitely did not have friends in the chronic illness, rare disease, or invisible illness space because I didn't see myself as someone that belonged in that. I was different. I was able to pull off the fact that I was fine.
Yeah. Let me ask you, up until that point in your life, how would you have described your personal endurance muscle or your resilience muscle? Would you have considered yourself to be someone at that point in your life who had any sort of taste of, and you already knew you had a diagnosis from prior, and you knew you had to deal with something already in your lifetime. But, one of the things that I've experienced over my lifetime is it's a muscle that has to keep working in order to get you through one battle after the next. And so long as you keep refining it, you're probably setting yourself up for more success, over the course of your lifetime as you go through different series of different battles. But that's not to say that you aren't caught off guard when certain things come about. So at that point in your life, you're going into surgery now, that the probability could be, uncertain, even though you are approaching it as optimistically as possible. Is there a part of you that in the back of your mind is thinking, I'm going to get out of this and I'm going to come out stronger than ever before? Or was it not like that?
It was not like that. I was definitely a resilient person, like, no question. I couldn't have gone through all that I went through silently suffering for 27 years, even if they were smaller, less life threatening experiences for my whole life. I had resilience because of that. And it, if I didn't, I wouldn't have been able to manage, getting into college and doing the things that I did and having the friendships I did and getting the internships I had and sort of being out in the world not defined by my health. If I didn't have resilience, I'd be at home in bed, woe is me that I have this invisible illness, this rare disease that no one else understands. My mom presented therapy and other opportunities to me at younger ages. And I was like, I don't need that. I'm good. Because again, I didn't identify myself as someone with an issue. I just pretended it didn't exist. And I felt different than other people. But I was such a strong personality and such a independent person my whole life that I just sort of made things work. But when you pivoted your question to ask, did I know that I'd come out of it stronger? Oh my God, no way. Absolutely not. It's like I came out of it and was like, okay, let's get through these few weeks of morphine and medical leave and this real intense time. And then over time, talking about it and writing about it and sharing about it is when I realized, like, ooh, I have something that I didn't have before.
Hey all, it's me, Bishoy. As a marathon runner and endurance athlete, I've come to understand the importance of properly fueling your body for preparation and recovery. Every day, you get a shot at success. How you start your day typically paints a picture of what the rest of the day will look like. Start your day with a super convenient, healthy, and delicious nutritional win. Meal 1 by Creatures of Habit. Overnight oatmeal packed with 30 grams of plant-based protein, chia, flax, and pumpkin seeds. Vitamin D3, omega-3s, a probiotic, and digestive enzymes made in under 1 minute. Stop wasting time or worrying about what to eat as your first meal of the day. Start with Meal 1. Visit creaturesofhabit.com, creatures spelled with a K, and use code MILE40 for 15% off a one-time purchase or the first subscription order payment. It's always interesting to me how that works. And that's exactly where I want to kind of take this now is it's usually in our weakest moments where we uncover our strength. And sometimes it takes a while to get there. And for everybody, it's different. Sometimes you find it right when you're in the pit, and sometimes you find it as you're coming out and figuring out who you are and who this new version of you is. And, again, there is no timeline. I don't want to even say weeks, months, or years, because it could really vary for everybody. And so let me ask you then where life went post-surgery and how we got to that recognition of not only understanding that you were walking around with an invisible illness, but that you're going to own it and that you're going to be a voice for others who are walking around with similar illnesses.
So my biggest thing was get me out of this job. I cannot stay in this job anymore. I can't work in this industry. It's just lipstick. It's just makeup. And I almost immediately found a job, took a major pay cut, but it was something that felt really meaningful, doing event production for nonprofits and health and wellness brands. And it felt more aligned with me. We had flexibility to work from home, which back in 2014 felt like a novelty. I worked for someone that was compassionate and understanding around health stuff. And so for me, I felt seen and I felt supported, and I can go to acupuncture in the middle of the day if I needed to, and I could work from home and whatever it was. I knew that the job that I was working then would be my last job before I started a business, without knowing what the business was, just because I had support that I didn't think I would get anywhere else, and flexibility. So that's sort of the professional side. But when I think about personally, I did start writing about my experience. I just referenced an article today that I have to remember where I published it, but I referenced it today of, I came home to my apartment post-surgery, and my friends had come over and decorated my apartment with flowers and signs and made it really cheery and welcome. And people sent me food and everyone was checking in. And basically, once they knew I was home and quote unquote okay, the calls stopped coming in. People stopped checking to see how I was doing, assuming everything was fine. And now, years later, I know so many people in the invisible illness space who acknowledge like how common that is, that once you're deemed in the clear or in recovery or whatever it may be, that you're all good. And that's often not the case. And so it came a time where I'm going, what are these stories and experiences that I've had that I want to help raise awareness, knowing that there's probably other people out there that have been through similar things with or without my specific condition. And I realized how many people there were out there and how many people had invisible illnesses, rare diseases, immune deficiencies. I got introduced to the Immune Deficiency Foundation, a nonprofit organization, and realized that there were tons of people out there like me with rare diseases. And I attended their conference. And similar to the way that I treated that camp friend, it's like, these aren't my people. They're sicker than I am. They have more visible things or more symptoms than I do. Like, I don't belong here. And it took time for me to realize that just because my symptoms were not as severe or were not as visible didn't mean that I didn't fit in the category of someone with a primary immune deficiency. And so, what I did was join the Immune Deficiency Foundation board a few years ago, and I'm very involved with them. But in 2018, I went online looking for content that I resonated with. And I just couldn't find anything about invisible illness that spoke to me. And I had helped a friend produce a podcast around motherhood. And I loved that role and I love podcasts. And I said, you know what? I need to create what I wish existed. And so in July 2018, I launched the Made Visible podcast, where I interviewed people living with or affected by invisible illness, which means patients, family members, doctors, healers, people who started businesses because someone or they had an invisible illness. And it was really sharing the stories of what was it like navigating life with an invisible illness and who are you as a whole. It's not just about your health, it's how do you live in the world. To your point, resilience and how you present yourself and are not defined by your illness, which has always been a really huge motto of mine.
Yeah. I want to go back to how, you said the first thing you did was you evaluated where you were for work. I remember going back to work after I shared my story publicly for the first time. And immediately I'm looking around the office and I'm like, nope, this can't be it. And
Get me out of here.
I was working in banking at the time, and I just couldn't. There was no part of me that could even fake it anymore. I couldn't be part of the machine anymore. I needed to be somewhere where I could be 100% who I am, and speak my truth and propel forward the mission that I feel that was now mine to own and to carry forward. And I remember that being such a powerful moment for me because I had no idea where that was going to go. And it's funny how sometimes in life, when you come to that realization and you put it out there, life kind of takes the wheel and it just figures it out for you. I mean, in that moment, I didn't know I was going to have 2 books and a podcast. That was not what all I knew is I wanted to leave the job. I didn't know where I was going.
Yeah, I relate to that so much.
Yeah, I had no idea where I was going.
No,
I just knew this wasn't it, and I knew it couldn't be it, and I knew there was more to life than that. And so I really resonate with that, and so I'm really glad that you called that out as being one of the first realizations that you had.
I think a huge part of that also is like trusting your gut. And that's been always my big thing. I can physically feel in my gut if something feels right or wrong. Follow this or be done with it. I have had experiences in my life, especially in business in the last few years, where I'm like, this does not feel good in my body. And I need to rid myself of this, and how different my body feels after going, we're done here. And I think it's just having that self-awareness over time, and in dealing with health issues, obviously, being more in tune to what works and what doesn't, and where you want to say yes and where you want to say no. And I think that unfortunately, it does take a lot of dark times or challenging moments that make you have those realizations. But I also think that they wouldn't come otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, but that conviction for me was strengthened once I owned it, right? I don't know if did you always have that strong conviction, or did it become stronger as you then owned it?
Definitely became stronger. I also think like I just stood up for myself in different ways. I think about who I was as a high schooler, and I was a bit more of a pushover and trying to fit in. And now I'm like, this is me, accept me for who I am, or like I'm not interested. I worked at Avon shortly after college. It was a very corporate, buttoned up job. And it was one of those things where like I never wore a suit or dressed up the way that my colleagues did. And I was just like, this is who I am. It either works or it doesn't. And I was not going to conform to societal norms like that. So I've always been very much an individual. And like, I had 8 jobs in 10 years before starting my business, and every single one of them I created for myself. They were roles where companies were not hiring. And I was like, I need to work at this company, and here's a proposal for what I can do. And that's what happened. And that's just who I've always been. So starting my business and podcast and everything that I've been doing over the last 8 years, to me is not surprising. And also I'm good at reinventing myself and like constantly pivoting and going, okay, where's an opportunity here? How can we do this better? And to your point, getting new podcast guests was always easy because it was having a conversation like this. And then you think of someone who could be really valuable, and then they become a close friend of mine. And I've got this new network of people in the invisible illness space that it's like a full database of people who are exceptional individuals, a lot of business owners that all live with invisible illnesses. And that's our connecting thread.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. You're spot on. And I love to hear it and how it came to life. And the cool thing about it is it's going to continue to abound. And as someone who's known you for a short period of time, on the periphery, I can see the level of influence you could have on your community. And it's to the point where even if you're not part of that community, you have the ability to catch the attention from people from the outside. And that's truly, a distinguishment for you, and something that I think that on the bright side of everything that you had been through, this is definitely something that's going to carry you and propel you forward.
I appreciate you saying that.
Of course. I want to talk about how things have moved along, since you've been on your own for the last couple of years, and talking about how you essentially grew the mission, and some of the aspirations you have for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So during the pandemic, I decided that I needed to take a break from the podcast. It was really time consuming, not super cost efficient, and just said it's a lot for me to emotionally handle other people's stories, especially around mental health during the pandemic, and said I got to prioritize my own. And so I took a bit of a break. My last episode at that time was my 100th episode, where my dad interviewed me and we shared a bit of my story. But I realized that writing has always been a real favorite thing of mine. And I've always taken to journaling. I've been in writing classes since 2015. And I helped out a writing teacher of mine while she was on maternity leave. I facilitated a class on her behalf, and I loved doing it so much that I was like, why don't I facilitate a writing class that's a similar model for people with invisible illnesses to share their stories? There's so many people, again, like me, that don't have an opportunity like this to do this. And I had people sign up from all over the world to learn about how to write, learn from experienced New York Times bestselling authors about their experience writing, publishing, and promoting their books about invisible illness or their essays. And then connecting with people around the world who had invisible illnesses. And you had this person from, Europe who had this condition, and this one in New York, and this one in California, and this one and it didn't matter what condition you had. It was the connection to navigating work, navigating family and friends, relationships, doctor's appointments, everything about you as an individual person and the emotions that you deal with in navigating invisible illness that you can connect on and how much you can relate. I mean, as I said, listening to your story, I was like, oh my God, someone that like refers to a golf size tumor, like just that made me feel like, wow, there's a connection we have. And so that was really powerful. And facilitating those sessions was just magical. And then about a year or so ago, maybe longer, I was connected to a friend who works at UBS. And she said, I think I should connect you to my employee resource group. And I went and Googled what employee resource group was because I've been out of the corporate world for a long time and didn't know what that was or the formality of it. And basically, she said, I think that there's opportunities for you here. So I ended up connecting with the ERG there. And I ended up interviewing one of their employees on the UBS podcast about what it was like to live with an invisible illness in the workplace and how she felt supported at the company. And it opened up a door to go, wait, why am I just doing this on my own platform? What about all these companies that have DEI or disability or ERGs all around mental health, chronic illness, disability, and are probably not tackling invisible illness majorly? So a lot of my time has been spent over the last year giving my keynote experiential talk on storytelling and invisible illness, sharing my story just as I did today, and then providing people with prompts and opportunities to write and share their stories in a workshop format. And this year I am launching a storytellers program that's really modeled off of my writing class, where it's a 12-week class that people can go through within their company to learn from experts, learn from me, and connect with other people at their company who are living with invisible illnesses. So I'm really just finding these different touch points to help people share and write their stories around invisible illness and feel more seen, heard, and supported. And for people who don't have invisible illnesses to become better advocates and more supportive and compassionate, because you just have no idea what people are going through, especially if it's invisible.
Yeah. No, I think I want to call out, like, there's a lot of things that we go through life without recognizing. And there's a lot of, man, the list of ways that corporate America could improve itself. We could have several episodes about that. But what I really respect about what you're doing, and you said it earlier, you said you don't conform, and I don't conform either. I'm a huge nonconformist, and my wife rolls her eyes whenever I say it, but because the truth of the matter is, in corporate America, we've been trained to conform, and one of the things that I love about what you're doing is you're dispelling, and you are increasing awareness around a topic that if you didn't speak up, no one would recognize. And that's the difference between some of the diseases that you're talking about and something that, for lack of a better word, is more visible. If someone is going through a cancer battle, it's a little bit more visible, and that's why it's a little bit more at the forefront sometimes around, hey, we're raising awareness, or we're hosting this event, or we're doing, so-and-so for it, where a lot of times people forget that some of the most impactful work that can be done is for the people who don't have a voice because they can't be seen. And that's what you're doing. And so, I want to thank you for that. I want to make sure that we touch on everything that you're doing and give you this platform. I feel like on my end, you've really set a stage for what it means to own your story, process your story, and turn it around into, the tagline here is that the comeback is always greater than the setback. And the truth as I see it right now is that your comeback's still far from being done. So I just want to make sure that I thank you, Harper. Thank you for coming on, for sharing your story. Hopefully I didn't cut you off and that you don't have, if there's anything else that you want to throw out there, please let us know.
No, I think that first of all, I appreciate you for saying that a lot. And I agree with you on all fronts. There's a reason that I ended up doing the work that I'm doing now. And it's so not, if you ask teenage Harper, 25-year-old Harper, if this is where I would be with my life, the answer is absolutely not, like 0%. And I think that's what's exciting about life. Like, you just have no idea what path you can go on. I mentioned this to a friend the other day. The other side of my life that we didn't really talk about is that I'm also a business coach, and I went through a coaching training. And I remember going through the training, and they asked us to write our 10-year goals. Like, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And I remember writing it. It's somewhere written down in a notebook somewhere. And very little of it is spot on to where I am now. Very little. And that was 2014. So yeah, 10 years for getting there. And I'm totally fine with that. And as a business coach, I'm really push my clients to think about, like, what's the next 3 months? What's the next 6 months? Because we have no idea how life is going to pan out. And planning 10 years in advance is just super unrealistic, in my opinion. If we could do that, then we'd predict the future. But at this stage in life, I'm sort of like, what's relevant right now? What should I say yes or no to? Where should I create boundaries? What's most important to me? And doing that assessment on a regular basis. But the planning so far into the future has never worked well for me. And so I'm just trying to be as present as possible to right now.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, that brings me back a couple of years ago. I went back to my undergrad and I was speaking to the students over there. And I told them, I was like, if I leave you with one piece of advice here, if I can go back to 21, 22-year-old me and give one piece of advice, it's that life is nowhere near as planned out as you think it is. I remember going back thinking, I'm going to graduate college. I'm going to have this killer job. I am going to meet my wife. I'm going to have kids. It all happened eventually, but it all happened on its own course. And it didn't happen anywhere near the timeline that I had thought it was. And none of the things that anyone listening to this podcast knows me for was part of that idea, part of that plan, part of that timeline, none of this. And so, thank you for, amplifying that message. I think that that's a key takeaway for a lot of people listening to the show too, is, you hear these stories of people overcoming adversity and you understand how adversity sometimes reroutes you. And if you're open to being rerouted, it'll definitely, in my opinion, speed along the progression to whatever goals it is that you want to accomplish in life. And so thank you for panning that out. And thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. I mean, we could speak for hours and hours. And, I feel like you're definitely someone that we're going to have to reach out to for a part 2 potentially to bring you on. Because I know we've only scratched the surface of your story. I've just learned to try to hold myself accountable now to 45-minute episodes. Otherwise, I'm going to be in trouble soon.
Thank you for having me and for your great questions and for all your kind words. I appreciate it a lot.
You got it.